I would like to start doing just a bunch of different episodes, each focusing sort of on a particular aspect relationship in astrology. Because I think that each aspect, as I learn about them, I'll kind of like know more how to implement them into my teachings, I suppose. And I always start with my own chart. And so I always start sort of like with what it is that's most relevant in my life. And then usually it's like one or two things that I sort of start to focus on. And then that sort of ripples outwards, because as soon as I find that one thing, I'll then compare it to other people that are in my life, and I'll see where that mirror reflects outwards, et cetera, et cetera. So the first one that I wanted to do is the relationship between Saturn and the moon, particularly moon square Saturn, because that's how it's aspected in my chart and in your chart. And it's something that has a really, really big impact on our lives. And then we can also use the same sort of logic to talk about moon opposite Saturn, moon trine Saturn, moon sextile Saturn, etc., or moon conjunct Saturn too, which is interesting. But I'll start with moon square Saturn because it's a particularly challenging one.
Because it's intense, and in my life, it has been been a strong focal point. Pay attention to this, and for me, it's cardinal. It's a leader. Let go of wanting to have control. Yeah. For me, it's about control. And then just to touch on this, and then it squares and opposes Mercury. So communicate about something that's more loving. Communicate about something that's not all about control. Yeah. I mean, what that tells me, just from me personally, is it tells me that I came into this lifetime from other lives with a real internal struggle with how to take action, how to help others, how to let others relax and receive. I know for myself that I come from lifetimes where I'm struggling with my feminine polarity.
So first of all, because we need to lay some groundwork for people. So in the context of your chart, your Saturn is in Aries in the 8th house, and your moon is in Capricorn in the 5th house,
in the whole sign system. Right. Yes, which makes more sense than in the Placidus in the 4th house. It makes more sense in the 5th.
Right. And I don't remember the degrees exactly, but it is a square.
Saturn is 22 degrees. Moon is 3 degrees.
Yeah, so it's a square.
Mercury is 0 degrees.
So the foundation of like what it means for the moon to square Saturn is we have the moon, which is your emotional upbringing and your nurturing in your home. So the moon represents how you felt as a child, what your sense of security was. I mean, this is like pretty much the foundation of your entire sense of emotional well-being as an adult. It's all about the childhood. So what was your home environment like? What was your relationship with your mother? And
it was strong. It was very strong, and especially for the first 10 years.
Right.
But then that's where things started to take a downturn.
But this is then the karma is introduced when we compare its relationship to Saturn the father. And so then
that's where it went downhill.
Exactly. And so we have moon, which is, and obviously the relationship with the mother is just one part of how the moon affects you. I think the bigger thing to focus on there is just the greater sense of home environment and security, because that's really how it carries into adult life.
Well, especially with my moon in Capricorn, I came in with incredible structure because, and this will get a little intricate, but I'm putting this in a whole context. I was born to a mother with Mars and Virgo who created a lot of detailed structure and a lot of organization. My moon in Capricorn really loved that. And I came into a home with a father with Mars in Capricorn. A lot of structure, a lot of control. We've got everything. We're in control. Here's your physical structure. We're going to eat by a schedule. We're going to live by a schedule. And my inner child, my subconscious, the moon, really needed that. So I had that from the very first moment. Like literally, Nana scheduled everything in her pregnancy. Everything was scheduled. Everything was detailed. So I came in feeling very confident and secure because I was born to parents who both have Earth Mars. So that totally worked. And then with her Cancer rising, she provided all of that moon's need for nurturing for me. And there was a cohesiveness with my moon in Capricorn to her Cancer rising. She understood me, whereas he didn't so much.
Yeah, so this is
She did,
so
though.
with the square relationship, you have a harsh connection between your sense of emotional security and your sense of well-being from childhood, then contrasted with the father, and the father being sort of this overarching structure, a sense of time, a sense of I have to get things done. And so often what we see in people with Moon Square Saturn is we see adults who have a really hard time connecting to their inner child. It's adults who overwork themselves. It's adults who prioritize getting tasks done before their own emotional sense of well-being and nurturing. It's adults who will often try to look at things from a more negative perspective, or they just inherently look at things from a more negative perspective because of what was imparted upon them as a child. So they look at a world through a pessimistic sort of viewpoint, seeing things as being basically waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for something to go wrong financially, waiting for something to go wrong governmentally, waiting for something to go wrong in terms of structure, because the Saturn more often than not tends to be the problem in that aspect. Saturn more often than not tends to represent sort of a sense of insecurity, or it triggers the moon in a way that makes the moon feel insecure. And we both have Saturn in Aries, and so we can see this come out through our relationships with our father. And this is not like, it's almost a cause, but it's also an echo. It's a mirror outwards. And that aspect, being Saturn in Aries, means stability broken by violence. And so that's a very traumatizing thing for both a moon in Capricorn and a moon in Cancer, because both aspects are very emotional in their own way. And so especially when you have other harsh aspects to, say, different parts of your chart that maybe want to play more. I mean, for you, it's in the 5th house, so this is the house of children and the house of expression and playing. And
actually, it was what that term saving grace for me, because I started taking care of children when I was a child.
Yeah.
And in my father's patriarchal, overly structured, we're going to tell you what to think and how to feel and what to do in his church, Pastor Wilder, my biggest escape was to try to go and take care of the babies and the toddlers in the daycare, so I didn't have to go and sit in the sanctuary and listen to him lord over me. And sometimes I was able to do that, and other times I wasn't. But I found that giving children, small children, structure, and then being able to play with them, 5th house, was a way for me to comfort myself and nurture myself, to be able to give to small children. I mean, I started this at the age of 10, to be able to give small children in my father's, house of the Lord, to give them moments of fun, because it's like, well, we're all trapped in this house of the Lord. Let me find some relief and give all these small, amazing little beings moments of fun. Let me go play with the kids. And it's time for juice and crackers or juice and cookies. And let's have some more fun. I get to change a diaper. I get to have fun with the children. Look at this toy. That, to me, to do that for an hour was like bliss. And when I reflect on my life, I see how taking care of children has been that for me. When I was in the marriage with your father, that was how I got through all of his rage and violence and everything. Was, I'm the mom and I'm going to take care of you guys. I just recreated it literally. I literally created all this structure, and I'm still was kind of in the house of the Lord, somebody else's Lord. And so I completely got caught up in being a full-time mom and, homeschooling you and all of that. It was the same thing. I played out the same thing that was set up for me in my childhood, moon in Capricorn in the 5th house. In quantum healing, we talk about that. We talk about, and sometimes I'll bring in astrology in my sessions with that. The first 7 years of your life imprints the subconscious, the moon in the chart. And you will play that out into your adulthood until you become as conscious as you possibly can to change it if it's not working for you. Yeah. And in astrology, that's also what we focus on.
Well, astrology is all about becoming more conscious of these things.
Becoming more conscious.
It pretty much is just like a little map to help you focus on certain things and see them in ways that maybe you wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
Totally. Be as aware of your own behaviors, especially your hidden behaviors, as much as you possibly can. Pause, breathe, observe, reflect. Notice the images that will come up in your mind when you're in a situation where you're actually repeating something. Because if you're not aware what you're repeating, you're just going to continue to repeat it. You're looping. Become aware. Notice the visions that you get. Notice the feelings that you have. Is this familiar? Why is it familiar? Where does this come from? How does your body feel when you're in this? In astrology, the moon teaches us that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Saturn teaches us that. There's a restriction for a reason. Saturn gives us the restriction. I really see Saturn now. I didn't used to see this, but I see Saturn now as a gift. I am telling you to pause, and I'm giving you a restriction so that you can see how you unconsciously behave.
Exactly.
Look at this, especially if you're a person who has Saturn retrograde.
Oh, yeah.
Retrograde is a flashing light. Pay attention to me. You have not been paying attention to me in all these other lifetimes. You really want to master this in this lifetime. Pay attention to me. Where's your Saturn? What placement is it? What house is it? How is it aspecting? Aspects are the relationships. And something that I hear from so many professional astrologers, multiple astrologers, is if you have not figured out, and I don't want to use the word, I almost heard the word mastering, but we got to, I'm going to throw the word mastering out, because mastering means I'm done with it, and we're never done with it. If you have not figured out, if you've not become conscious of your inner relationships, you're going to continue to loop the same shadow relationships without until you look at your own relationships and say, yeah, I attract that person. So let's find out why I attract that person. And that's a repeat person. This is one of the reasons why I'm consciously single.
Yeah.
Because I just noticed that I was looping the same guy. I was looping the same guy, and I'm like, well, I could continue to run that archetypal program and go through a lot of men, or I could just say, you know what, I'm going to stop, and I'm just going to continue to allow that man to come in, and I'm going to get to know him on a strictly platonic friendship level, and we'll see how far that goes.
Right.
There's Saturn playing out with Moon. I decided I was going to give my subconscious some strong structure. And Saturn in Aries is like literally my moon in Capricorn. It's the Capricorn. It literally in my chart, it's the moon that went, you know what, Saturn in Aries? You're getting really impatient. You get really angry. And there's this internal defiance. Saturn in Aries, internal defiance. And we just have to say, stop. Stop it. Stop all of that. And my Saturn in Aries is conjunct to my North Node and my Chiron all in Aries, all in the 8th house, house of death and taxes. So let's let that aspect of the shadow die off. Let's let Moon and Capricorn stand here in the 5th house of theatricality and celebrations and children and event. Let's get very delighted about all of this. Let's look at the fun of it.
Right.
And let's stop this. And let's celebrate within ourselves how wonderfully structured we are. Let's celebrate that we like to take action on things. Let's do online dating, and let's only focus on friendship. Oh, that's worked so well. If you are a Saturn Moon square, that's like a really wonderful thing. If you're a person who's listening to this who also has a cardinal moon and a Saturn in Aries, I highly recommend that.
Yeah, I think that
Online dating and only focus on friendship, because I've already had 2 men come in, only friendship, strictly platonic, and they've already gone out.
Yeah.
It shows you who's really interested in you as a soul.
Well, it can help heal that that father archetype, especially if you see that repeat in your surroundings, in your friendships, in your relationships, and all of that.
Yeah,
because that could be something that is unconsciously sought after.
Absolutely.
And I will also say too, it's, while some people who have this square may find that they just really need to play more and get out there and just be themselves more, there's also like it depends, because like I was realizing this in my chart. I have a perfect cardinal cross. I have Neptune opposite Moon, Mars opposite Saturn, Neptune square Moon, Neptune square Saturn, Neptune square Mars, Moon square Mars, Moon square Saturn, right?
It's intense.
It's like basically what you can find if you have oppositions that are aspecting these, if you have a T square or a cross, and all of those oppositions or those squares are perfect to each other in terms of degrees, is you can find that you fluctuate too heavy from one thing to another. In an attempt to heal those wounds that were created during childhood. Yeah. So, for example, with Neptune square Saturn, it's like I can fall into the trap of escaping as a way to just cope, and then it would be that Saturn is being ignored, and Saturn then is like, there's a problem with authority and a problem with structure, but the problem with authority and structure is then solved within me by running away from authority and structure rather than like sitting there and facing it. And it's an important thing to look at in terms of your chart, is to see all of those different aspects, because it can really reveal to you these unconscious patterns. I mean, I had a very long period of time when I felt really uncomfortable during those early years of my life, when my moon was really being affected in this square aspect, where I would escape into books. I would use the moon opposition to Neptune, and I would go in a Neptunian direction, and I would use that to comfort my moon, because sometimes oppositions can be felt that way, where it's comforting to go more in one direction than the other, especially if you're a child and you're able to do that. And then it's difficult, because that then inhibits my Mars from taking action, because then Mars will be sort of left in the dust, and it'll be sort of caught up in this ideation of things. Like, I just want to do all of these things, and I get all these ideas about doing these things, but there's very little action being taken. So actually, it's, even though I have this moon square Saturn, for me, I feel as though it manifests less in a way of overworking oneself, and more in a way of depriving Saturn of its role in my chart, leaving Saturn behind and just ignoring it, because Saturn represents such an uncomfortable aspect to me. The rest of my chart is not really giving Saturn strength. Like, Saturn's pretty much in its fall in my chart, all around, or in detriment, and so is Mars, and it's this really interesting relationship of how to tackle these wounds and how to heal them. You really have to go back. So I guess what I'm saying is, it's like there's a lot of different ways of interpreting this, and I find them all to be really fascinating, because I just think it's very important for people to start looking at these relationships. I didn't really fully realize how deep these aspect relationships went until I started to look at them. But they really, it describes the whole thing. It's the whole pie when you look at it that way, And yeah.
It is. My saving grace in my natal chart, my Jupiter in Leo, 29 degrees in the whole sign system in the 12th house, the house of the healer. And when you talked earlier about Saturn and Moon being square to each other, especially when they're in cardinal signs, there can be a pessimism. My Jupiter in Leo, 29 degrees, saves me from that. It's just, I'm like terminally optimistic. How you were just talking about how, because Saturn is in its detriment in Aries, and you used the Neptune to escape through. My escape has been, and it's been very intense, my Mercury in Cancer retrograde. But in the whole sign system, in the 11th house, the house of humanity, over talking to other people. Just over talking, over communicating. And since Mercury rules my chart, my default has always been, well, let me go out and talk with people. My classic default growing up to avoid dealing with the deep, deep pain of growing up with a very abusive father, an alcoholic, and sometimes bipolar, an abusive father, was to talk about other things to the death and continue to talk about them. And so when I was in the depths of the hardship of your father's and my marriage, I was talking so much about the detriment of it that I would hear my higher self come in and say, the more you talk about this, the more you manifest it. And you need to stop talking about it. This is a problem for you. Those are my thoughts, clearly. And they were coming from above. And it was like, you're right, I have to stop talking about this. All right. I already knew about the law of attraction. And so I'm like, how am I manifesting? Oh my gosh, I realized it was an addiction to talk about the difficulty things. And there's where the pessimism came in. So then I had to focus on something else. That's where yoga came in. Practicing yoga at studios, community, and that became my obsession, was yoga. Practicing and then eventually teaching. It went from dance and performing, which I had already just kind of exhausted, into yoga. And that's where, in my chart, that was where Virgo really started to come in and say, you need to focus on health and wellness. My rising sign, Uranus, Pluto in the first house in Virgo. You need to get off of this cardinal cross you've got going on. Here's Mercury dominant in my chart in Cancer retrograde, duking it out with Moon, Saturn, and North and South Node. Going, hey, you guys, we're going to get out of this conference call now that we've been on for a really long ass time. And we're going to get focused on Virgo, healing ourselves and health and service to others. This is our optimism. This is what we're going to focus on now. And the rest of the crew are going, yeah, but we're still talking about this. No, we're not talking about this anymore. We're done. Gemini and Virgo over here are going to have some fun. And we're going to go serve people with this now. And if you don't like it, you can just quiet the fuck down in the background. And it took a while for that constant inner conflict of, but we're going to talk about the problems, to go away and to just be like, no. And so for those of you that are listening, how do you get out of this Saturn Moon conflict? If you've got that square, you've got to focus on, and if you don't know what it is in your astrology chart, you just go by the feeling. What aspects of your personality are the ones that are fun and more relaxed and get you out of this internal subconscious conflict? Because everybody has some sort of internal subconscious conflict. How do you get yourself out of that? What's fun for you? What's joyous for you? What helps you to relax? What helps you to focus on the beauty of life? Everybody has that in their chart. Because some people will say, I don't have that. Bullshit. Yes, you do have that.
Yeah, you do. And
Of course you do.
For this particular relationship, no matter how you express it, the overarching theme is a lack of a sense of security. And so when we talk about, what is it that you do to heal it? It's about, how do I feel secure no matter what environment I'm in? And you just talked about this recently. This is actually part of why I wanted to talk about this, because I remember when you said that you were like, I realized that I had a fear of being homeless, and that was something that I needed to overcome.
I'm still working on that one. I haven't, and that comes from
Moon
other
Square Saturn.
It is, and that comes from other lifetimes.
Yeah.
Like I can feel emotion popping up in my pituitary, right into my sinuses right here. I can just feel like that just went right up into the third eye, the ajna. Mm-hmm. Literally that. And my sister had the same thing. That's why she was hoarding money. She was hoarding. And I had said to her when we were teenagers, And I saw her hoarding, and it was already starting to become a problem when she was an older teenager and I was a mid-teenager. And I said, Julie, I said, if we're looking at this from reincarnation perspectives, you have poverty past lives that are seriously playing out here for you. You have a fear of not having. And she just kind of like stopped and got big eyes and said, whoa, I never thought about that. That would actually kind of make sense. I said, and I didn't realize that I have it too. I have that too. I have this, and that's where the lack comes from.
It's the biggest detriment of having this relationship, because what it means is that you can't satiate and heal this aspect by working more and getting more, because the more you work and the more you get, the less satisfied you'll feel.
Well, not only that, but I know, because I've been a workaholic for years. Oh my gosh, I have to provide for my children. There's no, the father left. There's no provider.
Right.
There's no support payments. There's no, and it's like, before the scamdemic started in 2020, I was working 7 days a week at three different jobs. I was exhausted. I was depleted. I wasn't getting anywhere. I was not getting ahead. Was I able to finally just pay off the debt? I'm debt free. Yeah. But it didn't, it still created a deficit. I ended up being severely sleep deprived, malnourished. It was really a problem. My stress levels were really, really high. And I was just like, I can't keep doing this. Now, even working 6 days a week, I can't maintain this for a long period of time. There's still a deficit with that. It's literally still like learning to let go and trust source.
Yeah.
That's literally what it is. It's, you know what? You've always been taken care of. You're still being taken care of. Just let go.
Exactly.
Let go and allow flow and allow it to come in. And when I do, it does come in.
Well, I would say too, one of the traumas that can inflict this pattern or reinforce it from birth is having a Saturnian figure in your life who enforces a lack program in relation to money and resources.
And that would be Papa.
Absolutely.
Totally. Zone to all of us. Kids' money doesn't grow on trees at the dinner table. And I remember my brother said, after hearing that for several years, once Papa left the kitchen and we were all sitting there eating our dessert, then Michael would look at Julie and I and just say, you guys, that is such an old, stupid saying. Money doesn't grow on trees. And then he said something, it was not verbatim, but he said something like, I don't even know where that term came from, because he says, the rich don't use that. Clearly, for them, money grows on trees.
Smart guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he figured that one out. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that this has influenced me. You can see it. You can see actually this pattern in our genetic lineage. Mm-hmm. I think this is like an archetype that is just carried on throughout a lot of time for us. And
it did for my parents, which is interesting because it didn't for their siblings. Mm-hmm. Nana's sister married a man who ended up being a multimillionaire from being a realtor, from owning real estate, being a businessman. And she's still completely taken care of today with dementia and all. My Papa's parents, my dad's siblings, they all inherited the Wilder family farm. Tons of money. And now only he and his little sister are left. And he has money now. Not from that. He has his own money from the ministry. And my Aunt Kathy, she's got tons of money. They invested, and then she inherited money from the farm. And I'm like, where does this come from? It comes from an ancestral lineage that goes way back. But it played out through them, which played out through my siblings and myself, which is playing out with you three, my kids. Yes.
Absolutely.
It's like we came in to heal that.
Well, yeah, because I think we're the first to be aware of it. And that's really where the difference comes, because I found in myself the same sort of archetype of like fear of for me, it's like a fear of a loss of status or a fear of a loss of like social grounding, you know, a fear of like not being like seen or respected in a way that feels safe and comfortable to me. And that's definitely something that I am still working on. And I just became like more aware of this now. But yeah, it'll be interesting as I start to implement more of this awareness into my day-to-day to see how it shifts and changes for me.
It would be very interesting to talk with your brother Mars, who also has a Saturn moon square. Saturn is in Gemini and moon in Pisces, to see how this plays out with Mars's life, but with a mutable Saturn moon square. Because Kyan, our youngest, has a Saturn moon conjunction.
I have, yes, he does. And he also has a Saturn rising conjunction. So actually, we can talk about the conjunction a little bit too. The conjunction is way easier than the square.
Yes, it is.
Which is not always the case for conjunctions, but for Saturn and Moon, it works pretty well.
It does in Cancer, because Moon in Cancer is its home sign. Sometimes it's hard to get perspective in a conjunction because they're all on top of each other.
Yeah.
It just depends on the degrees.
Yeah, and I'm
pretty sure his Saturn in Cancer is a further away degrees and his moon is in Cancer. I'll have to look that up.
But basically what it means to have a Saturn-Moon conjunction is it just means somebody who is very emotionally serious and grounded in their emotions.
He is so much that too.
And it's interesting because if you look at his Saturn rising conjunction, that's actually the same thing. That's reinforcing. It's an outward exterior that is very serious and reserved.
Well, if there's because I'm so dramatic, if something is very dramatic and like, say I can't find something on my laptop, this has happened before. And I'm like upset about it. And I know that I have to vent my emotions because they're clouding my ability to actually be logical and see it. And he'll just kind of come in the room slowly in his Taurian Cancer way. And he's just like, what? I can't find that. I don't know why do I do this? It's every single time. I don't know what it is with my energy and technology. You've heard that a million times.
Yes.
And then he literally just kind of comes in and goes, well, what is it? And he doesn't do it forcefully. He's very slow about it. And then I'm like, look at that. That shouldn't be like that. It should be like, and then I have to tell him what it should be like. And he just goes on and he's like, click, 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 click. And then he looks at me and he goes, and he brought it back up. And I'm like, I say to him, I don't know how you did that or whatever, but it's annoying. And then he gives me his little scoffy bull snort. And then kind of just goes.
Yeah.
And he's just so, if you know that something dramatic is going on and you're dramatic, Kyan will just be watching. Mm-hmm. And then when the whole thing is done, he'll have taken a picture of what actually happened and you didn't have the accurate account of it, but he got it on his camera.
Right.
And then he'll just lean. He doesn't say anything. He'll just lean and he'll just show you, here's what happened. And you're like, how do you do that? And then he goes, I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting because if we look at the conjunction relationship, we see somebody who exteriorly seems to be very, if you don't know them, they can appear cold because
I know you're kind of like, I used to make a joke. Do you have a pulse in there?
Right.
Anybody home?
So
and then he kind of laughs.
It's difficult for them sometimes, depending on how it's aspected, because it may be hard for them to see why other people feel that way about them.
He thinks you and I are ridiculous at times. And he's just like,
right.
Like my twin Sonia and I, we made a little meme that I actually created a little banner for. It's still in my phone. What would Kyan say?
Yeah. Well, because a Saturn-Moon conjunction knows how to service their inner child. That's what they're very good at.
I know.
You know, and so if
he's so funny. He's like the sage that we go, what would Kyan say? You say, what would you say? And he just stares at you. What would you say to that, Kyan? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because we had no idea that he would be like this as a teenager, because in the first 11 years of his life, he was so squirrely, and when he was totally happy, he was all high, and when he was not happy, everything was horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting too, because you look at it's sort of him coming out of the moon, learning from that moon Saturn conjunction, and then coming into the rising more, and then you see how the exterior starts to mimic that state of stability that he so craved as a child.
Well, they're also so favorably aspected to his sun in Taurus and his Jupiter in Virgo.
Absolutely.
So he becomes more analytical with Jupiter and Virgo and more detail oriented. And let's go out and sky watch. And the Virgo holds on to things and is in the microcosm, and then will communicate that microcosm. And you're just seeing Einstein's equation data on his phone, and you're like, how do you see that? I don't know. I just see it.
Yeah.
It's so cool. That's what happens when you have a more favorably aspected moon in Saturn. And
Absolutely.
It aspects well with the majority of his chart, actually.
Yeah.
It really does.
100%.
It really does. And so he sees you and Mars and I as more ridiculous.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, because we are much more emotionally turbulent people.
You moon Saturn square people are so weird. I don't understand you.
And then it's interesting too, because if you have a moon Saturn opposition, which I have seen less of, with every opposition, it's sort of a teeter-totter.
Yeah.
It's either going more one way, becoming more Saturnian, or falling more back into that inner child. So this could be somebody who at times appears very composed and controlled, but then just totally breaks down at random moments.
Yeah, like my brother has a moon Saturn trine, moon Gemini, Saturn in Aquarius. My sister has the same thing as your father, moon in Libra, Saturn in Pisces. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I that's fascinating to me. So I don't really know, just off the top of my head, a whole lot of moon and Saturn oppositions.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. No, I mean, we could go on and on about this for a long time, but this is really good. Anything else as we conclude that you wanted to say about this?
No, I mean, I think that I like focusing in on these aspects. It's giving me a lot more of an actual communicate. I can actually communicate astrology in a way that I feel like is much more applicable and makes more sense, especially to other people. It just helps me understand other people and myself so much more. So, if you're listening and you found this to be insightful, or this helped you in any way, please just leave a comment and let us know. We
want to know, and we're learning, and
Absolutely.
we're always learning. Even though I've been practicing astrology for over 35 years now, I'm always learning. I'm always a student of astrology, always. And this brings it to the next level, because this is what it is. This is about really learning about the intimate aspects of yourself. You've got to go into the aspects.
Absolutely. And so I think that over time, we'll probably do, this is about natal aspects right now, but we can eventually get into synastry aspects, which is the same sort of idea, just one of your placements as compared and aspected to another person's. And so
the outer relationship.
Basically, I think that I'd like to just focus on natal right now, because that seems more time relevant to me. And if there are any aspects that you notice in your chart, or any things that you notice that you feel particularly challenged by, let us know. And I would like to
give us a message.
And because I'll basically just go through my chart and then surrounding charts.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah,
that's good.
Thank you so much to everyone who listened to this week's episode of the podcast. Feel free to check us out on Instagram at One Long Conversation to get some updates on our future episodes, our future content. You can also follow us on Patreon and become a member. We have a lot of interesting and awesome perks and cool ways to connect with us and our community that we're forming there. So go over to Patreon at One Long Conversation, and you'll find us there. We also have these episodes going out on YouTube now. So if you go to YouTube, yet again, at One Long Conversation, you will find video versions of these episodes. So yeah, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.